Cool, guys. We got Simon Dingle here from Twitter, one of the most popular people on Twitter that have been on this podcast before. Yeah, man, how do you want to start? But thanks for being on the show, by the way.
Thanks, great.
You made it easy. A lot of important people like you are very difficult to deal with.
Well, maybe I'm not that important.
maybe you don't know it, you know?
Yeah.
Those of them who are important and they know it, they're like, it's almost like you're asking them for a date, you know?
Oh, right.
Which is fun.
I think some people get too high on their own supply.
Yeah. yeah. They haven't listened to Biggie yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So, man, I've been curious with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody had to look into the internet, you get all sorts of things. Journalism, radio, and you have capital. So I remember one of my teachers back in the day that taught me when you meet someone with a company name that ends with capital, you must overly respect them. Because you might need money from them one day.
Oh, right.
So you got Inves Capital. What exactly are you doing now?
So maybe I should give you the background. I started out in media. Really, radio was my first love when I came out of school. And I spent a lot of time in the music industry and especially music radio. Music journalism. I started writing for magazines about art and music. But I've always been very passionate about open source technology as well. And so I branched out into writing about tech quite generally. And then my fascination with information networks, because I was like an early adopter of the internet for my generation, I suppose. We got our first net connection at home in 1995 and I was a little kid. And I started using the internet and it was just like a mind-blowing experience. So I had this love of music, love of media, love of the internet and open source technology. And then when I started discovering the financial world, because I basically started covering technology for a financial magazine. So I was coming at it from a tech angle, but then just saw the way the world of finances was operating as if the internet was never invented, as if we didn't have computers.
Yes.
You know, it was just the financial world, the financial industry was just like 100 years behind every other industry. And that kind of was mind-blowing in itself. And I started to become obsessed with that intersection of information science and finance. So fast forward a couple of years, and I first heard about Bitcoin in 2010. A friend of mine, Justin Spratt, told me about it. And the year after that, I compiled the Bitcoin core software on my laptop, and I really started working with Bitcoin in 2011. And that was really a life-changing experience to me. And so the next, the years from then until now have all been about fintech and my obsession with what's happening in the world of money because of open information systems. So I went through a few startups, 22/7. I was on the founding team there with Christo Darfel, and I bridged out of media into actually building technology and products myself. I was on the founding team of Bitx, which later became Luno.
Are you still on stock?
No. So I exited Bitx before it was even named Luno. And unfortunately, I had to get completely out at that point to pursue another opportunity in the UK with a company called Curve.
Right.
So no, I've got no connections left to Luno except for some very good friends. Marcus, who's the CEO, and Tim, who's the original founder of Luno, are just awesome guys. So still see them every now and then. They're very busy guys, but when I can.
Man, you must be rich as fuck, eh?
No.
Bitcoin 2010.
I always got out too early. But it's a whole different discussion. But yeah, so left Luno, did Curve. Left Curve. Curve is a smart credit card product, which is doing quite well in Europe, and it's launching in the US now.
And you're still in there, or you also?
I've still got my options in Curve.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
And then decided to go out on my own. So Inves Capital was really me playing around in the crypto space, investing in some projects that interested me, and just trying to figure out what to do next. So Inves does a number of things. We've got a product called Lettuce that we are developing at the moment, which is a portfolio management app. So it tracks crypto prices, but also other stocks, securities, mutual funds. So, in the real world, people don't just have crypto.
Absolutely.
They also maybe have Tesla shares or Apple shares or Vodacom, MTN, whatever. And we built an app that lets you track your portfolio across all of these asset classes. And then we do a lot of work behind the scenes. We're an operational partner for Binance in some territories, for example. So we do some work with them behind the scenes.
Yes.
It's not a company you're going to see out in the public too often, but it keeps me busy and very happy.
Yeah, it's like those are like the what do you call it? The elite, you never see them in the front row. They operate from the back. That's I think
we need to hang out more, man. You're like what do they call it? The poet that comes up before somebody and like the praise singer.
Okay. I never thought of that.
You sound a lot more interesting than I am.
Maybe it's my new skill this year. Yeah. I mean, looking at all these things that you're doing, and you also wrote a book which you didn't even mention.
Yes,
I think you're probably very humble.
Yeah, no, the book was interesting. I wasn't sort of thinking about writing a book, but my publisher, Tracy McDonald, approached me when 2016, I think, or 17, just before the hype. And she's super smart, and she said, look, I think it's time for a book about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, but something that makes it approachable for the average person, because a lot of the crypto community tend to be very highfalutin, very technical, and there wasn't a good book just breaking it down. And
but you call it math. Math is like a swear word to the normal world. Nobody.
I think so.
People hate math.
Well, it's obviously a play on the phrase that's on every dollar bill, "In God We Trust," right?
Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah. And so it was kind of my observation that in the crypto world, we've taken conventional sources of trust and reasons that we trust and believe in things, and we've replaced them with computation, with math.
Right.
We don't need central authorities. We don't need mythology. We have a better system or network to base our trust on now, potentially. So that really was where the title of the book came from.
Okay. So, I mean, the reason that I wanted to have you on the show was that, I mean, this whole cryptocurrency, blockchain thing has also gotten me into finance, economics, and money, the whole thing, right? Pretty much like everyone else.
Yeah.
One of the most common problems that you face is that things like cryptocurrencies or any new form of money are very difficult to emerge or to actually get adapted, simply because people do not really, we have never been taught about what money is and to think about it at all. We have never really learned about money as a subject, whether in schools or in society.
Yeah.
If we had to learn about the concept of money, what is it that one would have to know?
It's interesting because this whole conversation around what money is, etc., I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency have moved it along, but I think it really started for a lot of people in 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis. And this assumption that the people working on Wall Street, running the banks, that these were smart people, and they used this, jargon and terminology around derivatives and subprime and all these big words that nobody understood.
Right.
And I think for most people it was like the world of money is complicated.
Yeah.
We don't understand.
You just give it to the guys.
Yeah, let those guys run it. And then it's kind of like everything just imploded, and we realized that these people are actually morons. Like, they're not really that smart. They don't really have some secret knowledge that nobody else has necessarily. And these big words were just a way for them to confuse people into buying shit that they absolutely should not be putting money into. Right?
And they take a lot of cocaine too. I mean, from the movies. Based on the movies.
I don't know. I mean, mentioning movies, I think The Big Short is probably the best story of what happened in 2008 to 9. And if you haven't seen The Big Short, I recommend anybody listening to this or watching this go and watch the movie immediately.
Yes.
It's so good and it's so prescient. And it's on the money, excuse the pun. It just really tells the story very accurately, I believe. But this whole conversation started in 2008 and 2009. And so back to your question of what's the one thing people need to understand about money, for me, it's that they need to understand that money's a story. It's a game we play, right? And there is no central deity. There's no God. There's no supreme authority that gets to tell us how money works and how it should work. That's something we collectively as humanity decide together. We decide what the rules of this game are and whether or not we're going to play by those rules, change those rules, etc. And I think it's a fascinating thing that's happening in the world today, not just in the world of money, but in power in general, in politics. people are starting to realize that they have more control than they thought. That that politicians aren't special or smarter than us. Most of them aren't even harder working than we are.
Most of them actually aren't.
They're opportunists. Yes. And most of them aren't even that ambitious.
Manipulators, actually big manipulators.
Sure. So and I think there's really just an opening up that's happening at the moment with people going, how does money work? Why does it work this way? Why should these guys get to make all the rules? We've got this idea that we voted them into power and so they represent us. But when we look at the way they don't act in our best interests. Why is that? And a lot of these conversations I'm finding very interesting to kind of watch and get involved in. And I don't know what it means for us. I don't know where it's going, but I'm enjoying the journey.
Right. It's a very interesting journey. And I wouldn't have thought, in 2008, I had no money to my name. I was in high school. So, so I couldn't
I still don't. I keep plying it back into other
you were in Bitcoin in 2010, so I don't trust you anymore right now.
Okay.
But so what would it be that somebody had to learn, at least to start off thinking money as not as, seeing a piece of paper with "In God We Trust" and the face of a dead president on it, lighting people up. It's money.
Yes.
But when you start talking about, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and money, no government or decentralized, things get a little crazy for someone who have never thought about these things before, right? So what is it that somebody would have to learn to simply understand why Bitcoin makes sense, for example?
Well, we've got this beautiful example of the internet itself. Like, who runs the internet, right? Nobody.
Right.
There are organizations like ICANN that are naming authorities on the internet.
Yes.
But we don't need them for the internet to work.
We don't need them, but then I can't remember who I had a podcast with. Was it Fazam probably? Yeah, I think he brought up the case of we think the internet is not controlled, but then you see in Zimbabwe when they turn it off because they don't want...
So governments do assert themselves, and of course, in China, for example, there's a lot of control over how people can access the internet, etc. But if you think about the internet as a cohesive global network, nobody controls it in totality.
Yeah, for sure.
Zimbabwe can control access in its country. China can control access in China. To a degree, they're also limited.
Yes.
It's still possible to access a VPN or proxies. Or,
for sure.
Governments think they can control these things, and to a large degree they can, but ultimately they don't, and they can't control it globally. And the internet itself is an example of a network that nobody owns, nobody controls, nobody can really turn it off. If you think about it, the most powerful government in the world is probably the US government.
Yes.
They could not turn off the internet for every human being alive today.
Mm-hmm.
They could turn it off for 70% of us, right?
Yeah.
But they don't control it. And the internet works and it functions. And, we've learned from history, the more open, the more net neutral it is, the better it works. And the more effectively it does what it was designed to do. And so the idea that a network has to be controlled is just false, just demonstrably false, right? And I believe that the same is true for money. Right now, this is a big experiment. We're still learning. But Bitcoin, as a manifestation of finance on the internet or money on the internet, inherits a lot of those principles that make the internet a reality. Do we need a central authority for Bitcoin to work? No. It's been working pretty well for 10 years without a central authority.
Yes.
There's a lot of misunderstanding around the power of mining conglomerates, for example. So one of the stories you often hear people who don't understand Bitcoin, they'll say, oh, well, there's 5 companies in China that control the Bitcoin network because there are 5 big mining pools, right? That's just a misunderstanding of how the network works, because, of course, we have node operators as well.
Yeah.
The network can't run and can't do consensus, and new protocols can't pass without node operators participating in it as well. So miners don't control the network, and even those 5 mining conglomerates are pools, right? So each of those pools represents thousands of miners. And it really still is quite decentralized. So it's working. It's working. It is decentralized. There is no central authority. There is no one organization or person who's more powerful on the Bitcoin network than everybody else combined. And to me, it's just, point a stick at the example of the internet itself.
Yeah, so the moment you mention words like, oh, there's no central authority, for a lot of folks that are more like more government leaning, or especially government officials themselves, to them it's a red flag. They get like, oh, no central authority. What does that look like?
Yeah.
So if we had to imagine in a world where Bitcoin, as an example, has a cap of 21 million coins. So if we had a system, say a country like South Africa or Zimbabwe, if they had to have that kind of system where money supply is capped, or at least there's a level of consensus that has to go through that's transparent before they print more money.
Yeah.
What would that country look like? Or say if we had to have hard cash, capped, you can't just print it.
It's interesting because it becomes a discussion or a debate between two schools of thought in economics.
Yes.
The Keynesians versus the Austrians. Now, I'm not an economist, and I don't consider myself to be an expert in economics.
Who is an economist?
I struggle to come up with a name. It's not a field I follow very closely.
Okay.
I agree with some of the opinions out there that macroeconomics is just like a complete pseudoscience. But right. I don't know, right? My point is I don't know what a country like that would look like. But I like the idea of a deflationary currency. I like the idea that things like fractional reserves aren't allowed in the system. So it's designed to be anti-fragile.
Yes.
There can't be any bank runs that bring down the network. Conventional banks have a fractional reserve system and they have a government as a lender of last resort. But that system has failed. It's failed many times.
Yes.
There are big banks that have disappeared almost overnight when these systems have failed. So I think that Bitcoin's monetary policy is more honest. And I think that it could be a very good thing for countries like Zimbabwe. And if you look at history, people forget that Brazil, for example, had hyperinflation not very long ago. And it had a similar problem to Zimbabwe or Uruguay, where just spiraling inflation. And the way they solved it, I mean, there were many things that they did, but one of the things they did is they created an imaginary currency that had a stable price. And so while Brazil's, national currency was just spiraling out of control, this imaginary currency that they had pegged just maintained its value. And then they kind of just switched the Brazilian people over to thinking in this new unit instead of the hyperinflationary national currency that they had. And
so they just pretty much launched a new one.
Pretty much, yeah. Again, this is a game we're playing.
Yeah, right. Just print the red one. It was green, print the red one. This is different.
Yeah, the red one's stable. And if everybody agrees that the red one's stable, if everybody agrees that they're going to accept the red one, then you can transition over.
Zimbabwe had tried that, by the way. It didn't quite work.
Well, Zimbabwe's kind of tried that. I mean, they've tried a few things. A lot of things that have happened in the Zimbabwean economy, again, from my understanding, I'm not an expert, were kind of de facto things, and also just the Zimbabwean people deciding they were going to do things like adopting the US dollar and the South African rand.
Yes.
And then the government kind of made it look like it was their idea, but they basically had no other choice. Again, not an expert on these fields, but I think there are examples in history that that make me very optimistic about a deflationary monetary policy like Bitcoin's, and how it could be a very good thing for the Zimbabwe's of the world, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned fractional reserve. It made me sound like an economist, by the way. Could you just explain it? In my words, I would put it as if we had a gold standard, we would say that for every piece of gold that you take in, they give you a certificate, right? So the number of certificates you have must match the amount of gold that you have.
Sure.
So the fractional reserve means that you could have more certificates out, but less gold in reserve, simply because the rest is kind of...
My understanding is a little bit different. It basically means that the bank doesn't have to physically have all of the money that it accounts for on its books. I often speak at universities or high schools, and when people hear this idea, especially younger people, they're like, how is that allowed?
Yeah.
Like, really? And of course, fractional reserves for the most part work just fine. But yeah, I think people also don't realize that when you deposit your money into the bank, legally in most countries, it's not your money anymore.
Yeah, of course.
Legally, the bank owns it. And they don't have to give it back to you. They should. They're compelled to. They're obliged to.
One of the things that you will learn faster if you say you were to be in crypto, you don't have to be rich to learn a lot of lessons about money if you're dealing with crypto, because people get their bank accounts frozen, all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize fast that, the bank account isn't really mine.
Yeah, so you put your money into the bank. It's not really your money anymore. Now it's the bank's money, and they don't have to have it on hand all the time. So if you put 100 Rand into the bank can get away with only having like 20 Rand of it available, and they have very sophisticated calculations about what the average withdrawals are on any given day. And then of course they lend money out as well. They also don't have to have the money on hand that they're lending out. So banks can kind of create money out of thin air with loans. And a good deal of how new money enters the system is through debt. And so what can happen then is you have a situation like 2009 where there's financial collapse or uncertainty, or, for whatever reason you get a run on the bank, which means everybody's coming to withdraw their money immediately. And there are various ways that can play out. So sometimes banks will freeze withdrawals, or the government will freeze withdrawals, but the government's supposed to act as a lender of last resort. So
what does that mean?
The idea is that government will come and go, okay, the bank doesn't have all of the money on its books. So let's say the bank has taken deposits and issued loans, etc., and it should have, $100 billion on the book. It only has like $20 billion.
Yes.
Government can come in and satisfy the rest of that. But of course, that money needs to come from somewhere as well.
Right.
So in the 2009 financial crisis, we saw the American taxpayer foot the bill, right? Barack Obama's presidency reluctantly had to go, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Do we let these banks fail? Maybe that's what they should have done in hindsight. Or do we bail them out? And so what these banks got was interest-free loan from the American people that they never had to pay back. In fact, it wasn't even a loan.
Right.
It was just a bailout, which they then used to pay bonuses to their executives.
Of course.
So again, it's like, people who work in the financial world tend to roll their eyes when they tell the story and they say it's more complicated than that. But I really encourage people to just watch a movie like The Big Short, speak to people who have exited that world because ethically they couldn't work in finances anymore.
Right.
And also, in the worst case, just talk to people about how little has changed since 2009. Yes, we have some more checks and balances, etc., but I'm not convinced that things have really improved.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, one of the episodes that the listeners can listen to, I did with Zechariah George. You know Zach?
Yes.
He was on Wall Street. We talked about this and, the moral code of it, and ethically, a lot of people don't really like it that much.